Well, hey everyone, and welcome to Innovation Next, a video series by Leadership Network. My name is John West. I'm the director of Innovation Next, and we are talking about innovation in some key areas of the church. Today, we're talking about innovation and finances, a very important topic for us as we move forward into the changing economy, kind of post-COVID, and all of that. I'm joined today by Dr. Jay Moon. I'm going to read your title here. Professor of Evangelism and Church Planning at Asbury, Director of the Office of Faith Work and Economics, also an author and former missionary to Ghana. Wow, man. So thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, John. Look forward to our time together.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time. So I want to start with a quick question, though, if I could.
Okay.
Because we were chatting the other day, and I think in addition to your work as a professor and author and all of that, you also have a few other we'll call them side hustles. You manage 5 businesses. You're into treehouse building and you love axe throwing. So I'm trying to discern, is the axe throwing how you build the tree houses? Is that how to relieve stress from the businesses? Tell us just really quick about some extracurricular stuff you like to do.
Yeah, well, great question. So here's like one of the big motivations. I teach as a professor, all day, so which is great, and I love to be around Christians all the time. But I need to get outside the Christian bubble, so to speak, because I'm actually teaching evangelism and church planting, which requires me, and I actually enjoy it, to get outside of the bubble to connect with people in the midst of the daily life. And these businesses do that for me every week. I have this treehouse business where we design and build these tree houses. I have a professional engineer background.
Okay.
And it's actually fun to me. And I'll usually go out to a treehouse once a month or so. It's just refreshing. It's life-giving. And all these businesses are that way too. They combine opportunity to connect with people as well as just some passion and some abilities over the years. We do a Airbnb at our house. Largely, my wife does that, but I connect with people through that, and we have like a small cattle ranch in the back. I've got some cows there, the all grass-fed, non-GMO beef. So if you want some beef like that, let me know. And I do a little bit of, publishing and making gamification for digit oral learners. If you want to know more about that term, I'll explain that a little bit. And then I do some engineering work for people that want to develop property. So it just gets me outside, connects me with people. And really, in the midst of these business activity, what happens all the time is what Dallas Willard calls the divine conspiracy. He says that people think that they're talking to simply an engineer or a treehouse designer or an Airbnb guest or a cattle rancher. They don't know that I'm a pastor and I'm looking for opportunity to minister to their soul. So in the midst of it, I'm looking for ways that God's already at work and I'm catching up on that conversation. And oftentimes these interactions lead to prayer, to counsel, and it just is life-giving to me. So
Totally.
that's some of the background there. Yeah.
You are a Renaissance man, my friend. You're a Renaissance man. And I did go axe throwing with my family not too long ago. And it's really addictive. It is pretty fun. So
yeah. I don't know why, John, but there's a good feeling of a sharp object being thrown into a wall.
I'm telling you. We'll both enroll in some counseling at some point after.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we probably should dive in to the topic today, innovation and finance. How do we finance the mission of the church? This is crucial, especially today. I picked up the ebook you wrote, which is great, Missional Vibrancy and Financial Viability. And it just opened my eyes to a lot of creative ways that churches can fund the mission, and that new church planners and even entrepreneurs like you're talking about can do the same. So just maybe for starters, yeah, how did you get interested in this? Tell us a little bit. Obviously, you have a background in engineering and you do a lot with new startups, but what really got you interested in this particular research?
Yeah, that's a good question. So here's what often happens. People try to innovate in the form of the church because they know there's some some existing short-sightedness in the church. But what happens, no matter how far they innovate, they always come back to like, well, I need about 100 to 150 people in order to make it financially viable to support the pastor. So they keep coming back as much as they want to innovate. They keep coming back to those limitations.
Mm.
And what if a pastor is good at really shepherding about 40 to 50 people, but the only reason they're pushing to 150 is in order to be financially sustainable? So I ventured into an MBA program, in order to leverage what we could find from the business world that could help us in learning about churches and church planting. And what I found was that oftentimes there's a lot of church planters that have a call and they're going into this like fundraising, but they give up because the common model right now is you have to raise 3 years funds up front for the budget and you burn through that after 3 years. That though is about 300 to $500,000.
Oh, I
A
know.
lot of church planting teams say, well, maybe we didn't get that call clearly after all. And it's unfortunate because I think many of those churches, if they had other models that didn't rely solely on tithes and offerings, they could be planted.
Mm.
And the third piece is 30% of the existing churches in the US right now are in the red, and we don't know how that's going to turn out. That's over 100,000 churches. So COVID didn't cause it, it just revealed some of the weaknesses that were there.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that many of those churches could stay open if they looked at some of these alternate financial models that aren't solely dependent upon tithes and offerings. And I'm not saying up front here that tithes and offerings are bad. I'm saying, that's a good part of our own discipleship. But what if that is not the sole income stream for churches to be planted and to be sustained, which then allow us to innovate in different forms? And when we talk about this conversation, John, I want to make sure we keep together this financial viability, but also missional vibrancy,
Mm.
because we're not simply trying to keep churches alive. We're actually trying to help churches to have capacity to match their compassion to be transformative. Because if
Mm.
you have compassion and have no capacity, you just get frustrated. So we're trying to make sure that this conversation of financial viability is also matched with missional vibrancy, because that's the goal. The money should actually be like a tool or a servant to help us in mission and not simply to help a church survive on its own.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, so good. Yeah, as one who has planted a couple churches and experienced that pressure, I would say, on finances, it does then distract you from mission if you're not careful. And that stat, 30% of churches, wow, it's a big deal. Um, so you've done a lot of research, you've kind of created from that a list of ideas, some innovations, things that other ministries are doing right now. I'd love to have you just share what are those kind of innovations? What are some of those ideas? Maybe take us kind of a little bit under the hood of the research, maybe if you don't mind, and yeah, tell us some new ideas.
Sure, love to. And a lot of this is building. We have a network of people that we're building together. Mark Demas and a whole bunch of other folks that we've been meeting with, and I've just kind of distilled 6 different financial approaches. And there's no one size fits all. And I'm going to talk about these as discrete approaches. But what we find is in some of the research that we've done, people often start with one, and it works so well that they say, "Let me try another one."
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
it works so well, they say, "Let me try another one."
Okay,
It's
cool.
not uncommon for that to happen. The first one is monetizing underutilized assets.
Hmm.
In short, this means for the church or church plant to look around and see what kind of assets do we have that are not really used very well that we could monetize. So, for example, there's a church nearby here that used to, in its heyday, have 750 people in it, and it dwindled down to 25 people.
Okay.
But they're heating and cooling this building. And particularly, there's a Sunday school room that hadn't been used in years. So they opened it up to millennials who want to do like a collective work space. And they'd pay like $50 a month. And the first time they open it, there's like 20 people or so that jump in. And what that does, it provides an income stream to the church. But even more important, it provides a missional footing to connect with millennials that
Yeah.
were showing up at that church and weren't even sure if that church was interested in them. So a lot of times in the monetizing of assets, people look at their space and they'll rent that out or their parking lot or whatever facilities they have in order to find a way to monetize that, which also gives them a missional footing to connect with people that they haven't connected with otherwise. So that's
Yeah.
the first.
Great. Great. Okay, cool. So monetizing assets, number one. It's funny, as you were talking, I even know of a church here in the Midwest where they had just property around it, field. And you think about it, it's not even just the facility, it's also the land that you have and activities and events the city would actually rent off from them. And so yeah, that's great.
No, it's really interesting, and I don't want to get off topic here, but in the parable of Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, it just seems like God has given us this talent, and instead of sitting on our assets, I'd be careful how I say that. It's better to monetize it because God was not happy with the person who just sat on that one talent, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of churches are hesitant to get into some of this because they say, well, if we get into like exchanging money, maybe that's a bad thing. God seemed to be very pleased with the person who took the five and made five more, as
Hmm.
opposed to the person who had the one and just sat on it. So I wonder, in my musings here, how many churches are there that have that one talent? They've just sat on it and they thought that that was good stewardship. So we're
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
maybe that's not the best stewardship. What if you look at the assets that you have that are underutilized and then start to monetize that?
You know what? That parable always strikes a bit of the fear of God in me because he says at the end of that, it's not just sort of like a slap on the hand. It's you wicked, lazy servant. Like wicked. Wow. I always kind of step back when I hear that and remind myself stewardship's a big deal to God. So
Yeah, no, good point. Good
yeah,
point.
yeah. Okay, so keep rolling. What are a couple
Yeah,
more?
so the second one is to incubate a new business. So this is so the church that I'm like a teaching pastor with, we have incubated a business that is an event space. So what that does is we host space so that people can have events, and we'll charge for events like wedding rehearsal dinners or birthday parties, whatever. There's some events with the city that they've come to us that we don't charge for. So again, what this does for us, it connects us with a bunch of people that come into our building all the time that would have no other connection to the church, or at least our church. And it also connects us missionally to the city. So it creates great social capital in the city. It creates a higher profile, and it provides a financial stream, but it also connects us missionally. And what happens is our church has about 40 people or so that are there every Sunday, but we're actually in existence for now 7 years. Most churches that are only at 40 people, they have to fold up after a few
Hmm.
years. But having a side income stream through incubating a business allows it to be both missionally vibrant and financially viable.
That's great. Yeah. Plus, you have the idea of trying to help churches now see their scorecard isn't always how many people do we have at one particular moment in one particular place. Instead, what's your missional footprint across the community? And when you think about a business, kind of connecting with so many people out in the community on a regular basis. I was going to ask you on this one. So as a church or a nonprofit, can you start LLCs and that kind of thing under that, or are they separate entities, or how does that typically work?
Yeah, so there's some things to learn, which aren't insurmountable. It turns out that churches can rent their space and not pay tax upon that, and that's not a problem.
Hmm.
A nonprofit can make a profit; they just cannot distribute those profit to shareholders. So think about like the cookies that you buy from the Girl Scouts. I
Yeah.
mean, they make a lot of cheddar on those cookies, um, but they can't, distribute that to shareholders. They have to use that for the mission of the Girl
Oh,
Scouts.
gotcha.
The churches can do that as well. Churches can rent space, they can incubate a business, and they can use that profit as long as they use it inside, the mission of that organization, they just can't distribute it to shareholders.
Okay, got you. Great, great. Okay, so monetize assets, incubate businesses. Keep
Yeah.
keep
Number
rolling. What
three
are some
is
others?
nonprofits form mission arms for the church.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So this is actually kind of fun. There's a church in Little Rock. Actually, I mentioned Mark DeMaz. The Vine and Village nonprofit was formed, and they have about a $500,000 budget. None of that money comes from the church.
Hmm.
This is a separate nonprofit, autonomous from the church. Now, churches are nonprofits, but they can also form another arm. And what this does is it puts them in a posture where they can receive grants from governments and other institutions that would not give to the church. And as a result, it's not a negative line item for mission. It's actually rather neutral. And it can actually even be positive because the nonprofit that's formed can rent space at market rates from the church. So therefore, the church can receive income from that nonprofit as they're renting space from the church. And therefore, that becomes a positive line item. But what this does, it connects you missionally in the neighborhood with certain social concerns, social needs, etc. But it connects you relationally to create social capital and a great footing for ministering to people, preaching the gospel. And it also provides this financial stream, either financially neutral or if they rent space, financially positive.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
another approach.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Cool.
The fourth one is co-vocational leadership.
Oh
So
yeah.
I consider myself a co-vocational pastor. I have another job, right? And there's three other of us that are in that church. And usually when I talk about co-vocational, I think about team leadership. If you're going to be co-vocational as a solo pastor, that's going to be really hard.
Hmm.
Usually it's going to take a team. So we have a team of 4 people that are co-vocational. And it just basically means that um, you're choosing to stay in your job outside the church because that is just as sacred as your job in the church, but it also provides an income stream so that the church doesn't have the burden to raise as much money. And therefore, the church can actually be more generous in the community than they ever have before.
Yeah, yeah.
Area is like shooting up. Before COVID happened, Christianity Today had noticed a 32% increase in what they would call bivocational from 2010 2015. I don't have the most recent numbers, but I know a lot of organizations like I talked to somebody from Stadia not too long ago, one of the church planting network or organization.
Hmm.
They said before COVID they had no bivocational church planters. Now it's almost everyone is thinking that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a huge one on the radar screen that people are looking into.
Well, and as you even shared earlier with combining this financial piece with mission, that
Right.
co-vocational mindset does that really well. And I think in our culture, as it shifts and becomes more post-Christian,
Right.
the days of kind of having a great worship environment to invite people to is hard, it's harder and harder. So how are you making inroads? And this is just a great tool to get engaging in vocation. So yeah, that's good.
Oh, you're totally on it. Like when we talk about evangelism among those who are indifferent, either unchurched or dechurched, and I wish this weren't so. Oftentimes, the first invite is not to come to your church. There's several preceding steps before you get there. Well,
Mm,
how do you connect with them? For me, it's often through co-vocational like approaches where I meet people, connect with them several times, and then eventually invite them to a church. But it's not the first offering. It there requires a bit more to get there.
yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Well, number 5 is the entrepreneurial church plants. And this is where people, like a team, starts a business in order to create a venue for a church
Oh yeah.
or locates itself inside of an existing business where the business already keeps the lights on, etc. But the church uses that space for their church meeting. So uh, a friend was in London, England, and he said 20,000 people went down this street every Sunday with no Christian witness at all. How's he going to connect with them? Well, he started a cafe and a coffee shop, desserts, etc. And what happens is that church now meets on, I think it's Wednesday nights, about 30, 40 people. And it's been so profitable that they actually provide funds to help some women that do prison visitation. And they also employ women that are coming off out of trafficking. So you can see that the missional vibrancy connected to the financial viability.
Hmm.
And those two are played out in
Yeah.
entrepreneurial.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Then the last one is decentralized church networks.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is where, and there's lots of names for this. They use micro church, house church, bands, fellowship bands, etc. But the basic idea is that a church doesn't need to have everybody gather in one big location. They can gather at a local business or restaurant or house or whatever. And therefore, with these smaller units, there's not the burden for like paying a salary for staffing, et cetera, or like a building type of thing. So that's another approach. And I don't like to posture like these small micro networks against the mega churches. I
Yeah,
think both are going to coexist.
they are.
Both in their place. But as far as financial viability into the future and church planting, this is one of those approaches that's gaining more traction.
Okay, yeah. So I want to put up a little share screen. I was reading through the ebook and I came across this chart. I'd love for you to just take like 60 seconds, 2 minutes, and walk us through kind of how these different ideas are positioned in terms of, network access, financial liquidity. Like explain this chart. Walk us through for a couple
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, very good. So this is drawn out, thank you, John, from the book on missional vibrancy and financial viability, where I define these different terms. The first term is network access. And what we're saying is that there's no one size fits all, right? So think about your own context. There are church plants or churches that have, and think about access to people who are unchurched and dechurched. You may have very many contacts that are open to you, and that will be on the open side, or for various reasons, the church and that church planting team doesn't have much access to people that are unchurched or dechurched. So if you have open networks, that's the y-axis, then the x-axis comes into play. This is financial liquidity, and it sounds like a big business term. It just basically means how much cash does the church have available to them, or how quickly those assets can be converted into cash at market value. So you could think of it this way. Suppose on the left-hand side here, there's a church or church plant that they have open networks they can connect with, but they don't have any money, right? They just don't have access to a lot of money. Well, this is the time to look at the assets that you have and find ways to monetize that, okay, if that's the category in. On the other hand, there's a church, and I know several of these plants too, where they have actually access to people and they have a fair amount of access to money. This is where you can incubate a business in number B. But if you go down to the far bottom left, whereas B was the best of both worlds, lots of money, lots of friends, this bottom quadrant is like no money, no friends. So, like kind of like the worst of both conditions. Well, that turns out that's a great opportunity to develop a nonprofit as a mission arm for the church. Since you don't have the cash, you can find that through the nonprofit. And if you don't have the networks, the nonprofit can connect you to people, as well as co-vocational pastoring does the same thing. It doesn't require a large amount of cash available, and it also opens up your networks. Because for all church planters, if they run out of networks, then that's when their church plant stalls.
Yeah.
So finding ways to open up networks are key, and that's what these two can do for you.
Okay.
And in the last category, entrepreneurial churches, that's where you have access to cash, but you don't have access to networks of people who are unchurched or dechurched. And that's where you can start an entrepreneurial church in order to connect with people and utilize the cash in a positive way. After describing this at a conference, one person came to me and said, "Man, so Jay, I'm not even on that chart. Like, I don't have access to money. I'm even in debt, and I don't have access to a lot of people." I'm not sure if he meant he had a lot of means. I don't know,
Yeah.
but That's where the decentralized churches come in, where if you're even off that chart and don't have much to start with, the decentralized church can be another approach for you.
I now have a good line to tell all my co-vocational friends. You clearly have no money and you have no friends. That's why you started that. But it is true. I mean, I think that the chart is really helpful because it helps churches, ministries position themselves and think through, okay, what would be the best strategy? And we were talking earlier about the idea, a lot of times churches will jump in on one of these and then add a second, add a third,
Right.
just kind of continue to build out the ministry.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I do coaching with people and try to coach them where to start, and usually use some heuristics like that in order to get them started. But like you just said, once they get started, they realize the possibilities, and it actually becomes a bit fun,
Yeah.
because there's whole lots of options there. And then you start to realize, man, why are we stuck in that straitjacket that we had before, where there's that one model where it's just tithes and offerings, which
Yeah.
requires us to get 100, 150 people, and we just didn't break out of that. What I've found in some research is historically we haven't always been this way. So instead of thinking of these as new innovative approaches, we're really looking at a renaissance. We're
Mm.
going back to the way the church in history has operated before, say, the Industrial Revolution, et cetera. And I think this is not just like a new shiny toy that we're going to play with and get tired of. It's really like it's a renaissance going back to what we've like
Yeah.
lost and trying to recapture.
And man, that brings it full circle from a Renaissance man calling for a new Renaissance. I like
There
it.
we go, man. There we go. Yeah.
Man, we appreciate you joining on the call here today. It's been fun to connect a little bit, to learn a little on innovation, finances. I will say, if you're watching this, just a couple thoughts in the show notes. You'll find a link to the book Missional Vibrancy and Financial Viability. It's a great read. I'd highly encourage it. And then secondly, Jay, I know you lead learning cohorts through Leadership Network. If you'd like to sign up for an entrepreneurial church planning leadership cohort, I'd highly recommend that. Again, we'll have that link in the notes. But Jay, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, and love to follow up with anybody that's interested. I'm very accessible. My email is w@moons.com, and I'd love to talk with folks.
All right. Thanks, man.
You bet. Take care.